Here's Jeff.
I need to sit up there, I'm just listening.
You brought us a gift. Gee, thanks, Jeff.
We're live, Madam Chair.
Welcome back to the afternoon session of November 22nd's meeting. And the next item up is a discussion on road development agreements, how they've worked in the past and what opportunities may be there for the future. Linda, we will have.
I don't know who is going to take the lead on this conversation. I guess I sent the information out. I know since Brian Oakey, our deputy prosecutor, Doug, has taken a look at what we used to do with road development agreements, and we thought it might be worth a discussion to maybe talk about what we did, what happened, and perhaps they would work in the future. Because we are getting a lot more subdivisions, and we all seem to think that we need to do it in some sort of fair and equitable manner for everybody and not rely on 1 to 2 people to fix our roads. So it just kind of started the conversation. I gave you some choice pieces of information from the past just to, get you familiar with what happened. Most of it is, based upon the maps that we still have hanging up where we had the different capital improvement areas, plans that, were developed by parametrics, Doug Combination, Cody Jansen. So each one of those CIP areas identified rights of ways that needed to be purchased, improvements that needed to be made, and then the capacity of build out. And then it, divided that into the cost of the capital improvements, and then we assessed that when someone developed a lot, not necessarily when a building permit was issued. With the impact fees, you can only do it with the building permit. My understanding. Brian, do you have anything you want to talk about, or do you want me to just keep talking?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so in the packet, I gave you resolution 11-6, which is kind of what stopped our RDA program. And if you actually read it, it really clarified if someone wants to do a development, this is what they were going to have to do. And I think section 2 says,
And when did you send that? We're trying to get our fingers around
Tuesday the
it.
16th.
The 16th?
Yep.
Thank you.
and so that was done, after all the big developments were done, and we had very little until the last few years of subdivisions. So we never really got into the conversation again. I sent you a copy of a complaint that was filed by KDB LLC, and the arguments presented by them as far as Whispering Pines subdivision out off Gold Dust Road. And it's my understanding this was settled before it went to court. And so a judge never really reviewed that. The argument being that it looks and smells like an impact fee. We should probably do impact fee. That was that argument. I gave you the portions of the Valley County Land Use Code that we thought allowed us to do development agreements. And that was 30307 previously, and now it's codified at 9-5-3-E, bonds and fees. And then I gave you a sampling of different road development agreements so you could see how they were applied. And then an example of the CIP program. And Brian and I have had discussions about whether or not he I'll let him speak for himself, but whether he thinks that we should perhaps reinstitute the RDAs based upon our capital improvement areas like we did before, or if we should just continue down the impact fee road.
So I think think a good place for me to start is the Buckskin opinion. That was included in the packet that Cinda circulated.
Is that the Supreme Court decision?
Yes, this was a 2013 Supreme Court decision. And it was specifically related to a road development agreement for subdivisions. And the relevant part of this particular case, and it's a published opinion by the Supreme Court, so it's their interpretation of the development impact fee statute that we're governed by, says that county can enter into a road development agreement with a developer as long as it's voluntary. Those are enforceable. So you do have options beyond just publishing or promulgating the impact fee ordinance. That certainly is an option to consider as well. As mentioned, I think in several meetings prior to this, that Gem County was pursuing the impact fee study with Galena Consulting. They completed that. They basically developed and promulgated their ordinance, and that gives that basically sets the standard for how impact fees are going to be handled in their county. And I think you need to keep in mind that statute's always there, and we should be cognizant of it and be making sure that we comply with it. But that doesn't completely slam the door on road development. If the developer and the board voluntarily agree, and I think we need to carefully craft those agreements to document that these are voluntarily entered into and is not a condition of approval for CP, and that's kind of been the controversy. The controversy in the KG, what was it, ADB developers and the Buckskin lawsuit was the petitioners brought suit saying that, yeah, we voluntarily agreed, but we felt like we weren't going to get approval unless we did agree. And that's what kind of brought the Buckskin case in front of the courts, was whether or not it was in fact truly voluntary. The court sided with Valley County on that one, said that it was a voluntary agreement and both parties benefited from it. So there are options. The second part, which I think was important, was equally important in the Buckskin case, says that even if the county imposes some conditions that the developer is not in 100% agreement to, those can still be lawful because the developer has rights. They can bring a petition for judicial review, or they can seek a takings analysis under other sections of Idaho law. So there are options that are available. I think that because we've had a history of litigation on this, that is something that if we do pursue before we get an ordinance enacted, that we just need to all be on the same page and that we carefully review it and analyze it as we go. So I think unless you have questions, I think that's kind of what I wanted to present, is that I think the board needs to understand they do have some legal options with new developments coming in as you go.
So if I'm a developer and I have options for development, I can come in and do a planned unit development, which gives me greater rights by entering into this agreement with the county. Or I can go out and develop, 2 or 3 acre parcels and have, not as dense. There's not the extra added benefit to doing a PUD. So that's the way I'm envisioning road development agreements also. There may be a partnership with the county on some kind of a road maintenance agreement if you enter into an RDA where it becomes a public-private partnership almost. We're willing to do A if you're willing to do B. Does that make sense? You know, where we're actually partnering with some people and that's like a carrot to them to sign on to this thing and do something. What I'm hearing also from you is like, so there was a development that's at the back of Loomis, or it's back in Warren Wagon. And we're requiring him, or have made a recommendation to make him upgrade that road.
Most
So-
recent subdivision approval back there.
So my question is that what I'm hearing you say is that may or may not be legal to require him to do something if he doesn't agree to do it? But if he doesn't want to do it, he just doesn't do the subdivision.
Right. I think that based on the status of where that's at, I think that's just got a preliminary plat approval on that, correct? So we're right in that stage where if the county wants a road development agreement, I think now's the time to sit down with that developer, and I think it's going to be a robust negotiation. I attended the planning and zoning hearing that developer presented his plat to the P&Z Commission for, was aware of the desire that the county has to have him improve Loomis Lane all the way out to Highway 55. And I know he has some concerns about that cost. So I think that there are options, I think the door is still open, I guess is what I'm saying, is that we can sit down, but we do need to sit down and we need to negotiate with the developer and see if there is a place where they're comfortable signing off on or agreeing to the conditions that we're asking for, and vice versa. The county is satisfied that based on the density of that particular subdivision and the impact that that's going to have on both Old State going in and Loomis to that area, that it will adequately cover the impact of new growth in the area. That's the concept of these road development agreements, or any impact fee for that matter, is that the developer pays their fair share for the impact that they have on public utilities or roads or whatever.
So the RDA normally would be entered into prior to the acceptance of a
Preliminary plat.
preliminary plat. So it'd be part of the application process, would be completing an RDA with Jeff. How do you make a recommendation if you don't have an accepted agreement with a developer?
So what you're saying is that they have to have an RDA with the Board of County Commissioners before they can apply for a preliminary plat with the P&Z Commission?
Well, it could all be approved at once. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is how do you go into it like this development and approve something and request, I guess you could request that an RDA be approved before final plat is signed.
Yes.
That would be the language. So what if they don't agree to do an RDA?
Then they don't have approval. They have to work with Jeff and work out a road development agreement.
But that's what we got in trouble for last time, was they felt like they wouldn't get approval unless they signed on this RDA.
That was their argument, and they did not win.
Okay.
In the Buckskin case, that was clearly their argument. They said they signed on, but only because they felt like they wouldn't have obtained approval without their agreement. The court didn't see it that way.
Okay.
So
And when we say proportional share, on that specific one, it was to repave the road from Wagon Wheel out to Highway 55. Now, is that a proportional share? For, it's going to be less than 80 lots, when there are thousands of lots already out there and some of them not constructed on. So what is their proportional share?
That's what's hanging me up too.
Right, and that's why that capital improvement program that we had before was a fair and equitable way to do it for everybody, because all of the impacts were assessed up front. The cost of improvements, the cost of right-of-way acquisition, everything. And then they determined full build-out for that CIP area. And, took that number, divided it into the cost of these improvements, and then that's what the developer paid. Because that was their fair proportional
Mhm.
share.
I think
Yeah, that's a good point, Linda. I was just gonna say the same thing, that, when we started that program, part of the issue that the county was facing is the first developer in may need to, construct a roadway or upgrade a road all the way out to Highway 55. And that didn't seem fair either, whereas, the last development in could be a lot bigger development and all the roads are improved, and so they have no share. And then, there was a realization that the county's got a responsibility also to upgrade the roads for the existing developments that are in place. So we're trying to come up with a way to, as Cinda said, decide what's that proportionate share. So, nobody's unfairly getting dinged for the cost of improvements.
And I think that's the design of the development impact fee statute, is that it's a comprehensive, it is really supposed to be a comprehensive plan for how these are going to be imposed. And it requires the county to develop an ordinance, and I think that process has been started with the consultant. But we have to have also some decisions and a plan for what happens during the interim. And until that point in time, when we've got this in place, we're still seeing requests for development. We need to have, to give you and the Planning and Zoning Commission the best available answers to the questions that you have about what can we do when we have higher density subdivision coming in. So I think that I think that development impact fee statute, we need to continue to pursue that process of completing that project and deciding how that's going to work. I know there's going to be an advisory committee. There's a requirement in the statute that you have an advisory committee for that, and get their input on how the ordinance should lay out. But in the meantime, you have in front of you, I think this request for a final plat still pending, and others that will come. And so if you can keep in the back of your mind that an opportunity to negotiate with these developers on what they feel would be fair and equitable, and if it's acceptable to the county, you can enter into those road development agreements, legally do so, and defend it in court if need be during this interim period.
I think one of the areas that I'm familiar with since I came on board was that the funds that the developers put for development in those CIP areas was not utilized in those CIP areas. And so if we were to do this again, we would have to have different line items under Jeff's budget. CIP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and any development funding that came in had to be used in that specific CIP area. And we would need to make sure that it was in our budget to complete whatever agreements we had reached. So the question I have is, without having really great stable funding sources yet for the road department, I mean, we have basic monies in that department just to snowplow. How do we confirm that moving forward, we go in and this is CIP 3 and this developer puts $150,000 in there and we agree to go out and pave the rest of Loomis? Well, we may or may not have that funding to do that. So it's very difficult to pre-plan a county expense when we don't have a funding structure in place to be able to make sure that we can meet our obligations again. And we're just going to get right back into a situation where we're going to be in trouble again if we do that.
Well, I think to add to the point you're making, that I recall from the E&Z hearing the developer saying that ultimately their goal for their subdivision is to dedicate those residential roads for county maintenance once the subdivision is completed. And I know that puts a burden on Jeff to continue to add more roads to plow during the wintertime. And
Right now, we're not accepting anything. I mean, that's up to their HOA to hire somebody to go take care of it, because we're not going to accept those roads.
I don't know that I'm real comfortable talking about the specific one.
Okay.
I mean, let's just talk an example.
Sure.
because-
That's,
Well, and it was an
Yeah,
example, you know,
the
because
developer
it's,
isn't here.
um, you know, that's my largest concern. I mean, we do have a master transportation plan that we're gonna be working on and could identify and figure out where these CIPs are and what's gonna be needed in those areas. So that's coming down the pike here, you know, in the next year or two to complete that plan. So we're gonna know a little bit more. But
So do you envision with the impact fee application, the ordinance that Ann Westcott's doing with the Lena Summit, the developer paying those? Or are you going to have road development agreements with the developer and then the building permit is where you pay the impact fee?
well, you can't charge both. So
Right.
you can't place an impact fee against something that's already been paid for up front. So, I mean, it's almost like that's one of the negotiations, in my opinion, between the developer is, do you want to go the road development agreement with the county and then waive your impact fees for that subdivision? Or do you want to have it all done by impact fees? And that's,
Or are you going to require them? I mean, what if the road isn't adequate to service them? Out west Roseberry, I see several large subdivisions coming in. Are you going to do development agreements with each one, or are you going to do something that's uniform and with everybody? I mean, and is it going to be at the time of building permit or at the time of development?
my personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion, you have to work with a developer. I mean, that development, the costs associated with that development needs to be with the developer. They can put them into the cost of the lots.
Mhm.
And that way the individuals are paying for the privilege of living in that subdivision that has all of the necessary upgrades to get there.
And so you'll want to do
built
that
into
with
the
each
cost
one of
of the
those
lot.
different subdivisions out there.
Yeah, the challenge is to figure out what that
What that amount
portion
is.
is for new and, future subdivisions.
regardless of, I mean, if that's the decision that the board wants to go, I think it's critically important that those expectations are communicated to the Planning and Zoning Commission so they can make that known to the developer when they come in for a preliminary plat approval during the P&Z hearing process. So that they'll know that there may be additional requirements in addition to this, just this plat that you were proposing and it's being reviewed, or if it can be integrated somehow into that plat approval process, that would be helpful. I don't know procedurally how that will work or how I can help in that regard, but I do think that it needs to be communicated somehow to the developers that there's going to be some additional steps in the process for getting projects reviewed and approved and off the ground.
That comes with a comment from Jeff about what's going to be needed. But what is that based upon?
And that's where we need to legally figure that out, so it is, applied equally to all. So, I mean, we keep talking about development on this side, and making people out West Mountain help pay for that S Bridge. Well, that's only one development, and there's numerous ones going on out there, so it is not fair just to a developer to say, you're gonna pay for this. Everybody should have a hand in that. So I like the CIP stuff. As long as we can apply it legally and, figure that out. I know that Ann has stated though, if a developer pays for road improvements up front, we can't charge them a road fee when they come in for building permits. So it becomes a challenge if we choose to do impact fees, figure out who's already paid and who hasn't paid.
So, I mean, if Jeff wrote something that said, this development is large enough or dense enough, that they have to enter into a development agreement for upfront road improvements or compensation so that we can collect these monies. And then we make road improvements. I mean, the 5-lot subdivisions probably wouldn't participate in that road development agreement thing. But all of those lots would have to pay the impact fee. Existing lots would have to pay the impact fee. You know, and I'm just trying to sum that up. I think we should probably carry on this conversation once we all think about it. But if you do that impact fee, are the lots in Tamarack subject to those impact fees, given that they've already participated in a development agreement with us?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I don't think you can go back after it.
I think that's really gonna require, that's gonna require some research to determine whether you can retroactively apply an impact fee
Yeah.
To an existing law that has already been approved and is done.
I don't even know if I feel comfortable with that. I mean, I think it's like moving forward. I mean, we already lost the opportunity on that development. Moving forward, anything beyond what's there now or is what we would collect these fees on.
I'm talking about the individual lots. Because if somebody from Tamarack comes in with a building permit, and if we have our impact fee ordinance in place, then they would pay an impact fee at the time of building permit.
You're talking about a bare lot that would.
Yes, impact fees, not the road development.
Right.
agreements.
No, and in that case, I think, yes, we're charging impact fees on, we would be if we can
On
get
all
that
existing
through.
lots, whether or not they,
On new construction. So we're talking about like scale. I mean, you know, if we're talking about, I mean, it seems like we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I gotta think that other communities have
Yeah, I was gonna
a way to scale this out, you know, by lot or by development, however we want to do it. I think that we're collecting impact fees where we haven't collected them in the past on new construction. We're not collecting fee, you know, I know that we've had an agreement with Tamarack in the past, so we wouldn't be collecting fees on stuff that we've already collected fees on out there.
so there wouldn't be an impact fee. And there are lots of subdivisions that have already paid road development agreements that don't have building permits yet. So will those be in your impact fees? I mean, I think I hadn't even thought about that till now.
And I
Once
forgive me
the-
for not knowing this, but I think isn't that what Lane Consulting was hired to do, was to evaluate how to anticipate what the impact, the cost to the community is, and it's not just the road department, it's the fire district and the schools and all across the board universally. There's going to be an impact to development of the community, and some of those fees should be allocated to the fire districts and schools for busing kids and things of that nature. And just looking at what has been finalized in GIM, it looked like that's what they did. The lion's share of this analysis and the report that they drafted was here's how much should be allocated to this fire district and how much to the
Right, and I guess what I'm kind of wondering is, did we ask them to break that down by, you know, development versus a lot? Because that's what we're talking about is, you know,
What I'm hearing is if they've signed an RDA and made some kind of a payment in the past, then you
that would
can't
negate the
charge.
capital or the impact fees.
Yeah, you can't charge that impact fee, but I'm questioning, I mean, how many subdivisions actually paid an RDA? Well, we refunded some.
About $6 million worth.
We
That we
repaid
refunded
some
or
and then
that we've had
used.
paid in?
So the basis for stating that you can't have both, is that just something that,
That's what Ann said. That's what I remember. Do you remember her saying
I
that?
do not remember her saying it.
I don't know if it's been a separate conversation or not, but
I may just double check that.
that'd be great.
I don't think in any sense it's appropriate to double dip. But if an RDA is specific to a road issue and the impact fees are fire district.
No, just the road portion. It's the only thing
Will
I'm
be our,
questioning.
yeah.
So,
For impact.
For impact.
so the impact fees, so the fire districts are gonna have their own impact fees. We will collect on their behalf.
Separate, apart from, it won't be
We will collect on their behalf. But our impact fees will be broken down, so much for roads, so much for parks, so much for sheriff. And so we would have to negate the road, but I mean, we're talking about an administrative nightmare. If we get
Yeah.
into, get one wrong, we're in trouble.
And if, I mean, I emphasize if, because I want, like I said, I want to research that question and make sure that there's a legal basis for using an impact fee where an RDA has already been imposed. But if an RDA is specific to improving an existing road because it's either dilapidated and needs to be redone, that road's still going to require maintenance over the lifespan of that road, and that's going to be impacted by the number of vehicles that use that road at the time. And so, if you can separate your impact fees for ongoing maintenance for the road and the RDAs for, we need to expand this and improve it because it's not going to support the additional traffic, then we've created two different boxes. But again,
Yeah, the impact fees can only be for capital improvements. It can't be for ongoing maintenance.
Right.
okay, so that
Right-of-way
that'll be-
acquisition.
all that will kind of be flushed out as I can do some more research.
I think
Another thing-
RDAs make sense. I mean, it makes sense because it's directly impacting and mitigating something that development is creating, a problem on our road systems that development is creating. So I almost like RDAs better than I do impact fees, for roads, yeah. And so, maybe that's something that we look at specifically, the RDAs for roads, and I don't know how much Tamarac's already paid in or what they've done on, as far as off-site improvements. Whether it impacts their purchase, their lot purchase or not, I don't know, but, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing is legal. And I think what it is the conversation that all of the commissioners have had throughout the counties is creating revenue sources other than property taxes. We have an obligation to create safe and effective roads. How are we gonna pay for that other than putting that on our property tax base all of the time? And I think that's basically bottom line is what we're trying to do is
Mhm.
create
Growth paying for itself.
revenue. Yes.
It's not all
Exactly.
the taxpayers paying for the growth.
Well, one of the things that I think, and I can't, Cinda, maybe you remember, but I can't remember if it's KDB or whether it's the Buckskin case, but the development was going to be built in phases. And one of the things that created the controversy between the county and the developer and resulted in a lawsuit being filed was that phase one and phase two was the agreed upon amount was X number, but then it almost doubled for phase three and phase four. And I'm certain that the reason that it went up in cost was because the cost of construction went up over time. And so we need to remember to build those step ups into those RDAs or whatever it is we decide to do and make that part of the agreement so there's no surprises going down the road. But when you get phase three or phase four, it's going to be a higher number depending on what the cost per mile of the road is going to be.
Doug,
Yeah,
do you
because
have-
of that. And you'll remember this, Cinda, I mean, some developers chose to pay for all of their phases up front so that they'd avoid that cost increase, as they developed over 3-5 years, whatever, their planned development time was. And in that case, they paid the cost at the time that they put the development through. And then others like Buckskin did it, in phases, and the cost did change. You're exactly right. It was directly related to material and construction costs, and also right-of-way costs increased, as land values went up.
And that was between the 2005 and 2007 CIP.
Yep.
Doug, do you have any feedback as far as how other communities do this?
I won't pretend to be an expert on what everybody's doing. The one thing that I have always heard with impact fees, and again, I don't pretend to be the legal expert on it, is that it ties the county's hands a bit in the timing when you have to spend that money, and that if you don't spend it within a certain time frame, you forfeit it. That was something that, we were concerned about, when we set up the RDAs. And I think with the RDAs, the idea always was that it was voluntary. And I understand from a developer's perspective, well, I need to get my development approved, and you want us to enter into, quote, a voluntary agreement. But part of the thought was, you have substandard roads. Even if you go down a road and it looks fine, a lot of the roads in the county are literally asphalt on top of, existing ground. There's no structure to the road itself. And so part of the idea was a development could choose to wait rather than enter into an RDA and pay for the improvements. They could choose to wait until the county, got enough funding to make those improvements. But obviously that could be a really long wait. But that was sort of at least the thought process behind the voluntary portion of it.
You don't have to develop, you're totally your choice. This is
That was the thought.
this is your cost behind it. If you choose to move forward, great. If you don't, great,
Yep.
Okay.
But, the concern was the county has to provide that transportation service, not only to the new development, but, existing residents. And if you have a road that can't handle the traffic and is substandard, now you're really harming your existing residents out there too.
Which we are.
Right.
All right. Okay, well, my thought would be, we find out what's legal, for certain, and then have a greater conversation about it. But, I think RDAs are great. I think I always had to enter into a road improvement. Any development I've ever done, I had to do that. And pretty much pay for all improvements down in the county, or down in the valley anyway. I'm very familiar with that process. And it just becomes an expectation for development that there's going to be an expense here and you're gonna pass it on to your purchaser. It just goes into the price of the lot. So,
And when they come in, to talk about their development, I always say, you're gonna have to talk to Doug. Not Doug, sorry, Doug. Jeff.
They look a lot alike.
Well, okay. You have to talk to Jeff, that's gonna be, part of what you have to do. But, in true honesty, we just started getting subdivisions.
Right. And I think the improvements to the road are one thing, but also, like you mentioned a subdivision where they said, well, they're gonna develop it and then they're going to come and ask us to maintain those roads in the winter down the road. And it's like, we just build that into it and say, there's gonna be a expectation at some point that you want us to do winter maintenance on that. And that's immediate to me. That's the immediate return on their investment for it.
so the recommendation from the road advisory group was that we require HOAs be put in place and that it is up to the HOA in order to maintain their roads. They actually collect it monthly from all of the owners in there, and we are out of it, and we do not take future roads. And I think that's a good way to go. You got 80 homes back in there, you guys form your own HOA and you take care of it yourself.
But another consideration is, if it's connected to other private properties and things, we want public rights of way through there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still maintain it. We need public rights of way for that circulation.
Higher density subdivisions, that's where critically important just for snow storage.
Absolutely.
Future broadband.
Absolutely. They have to put that in when they're going to.
Yes, they do. So just an FYI, remember Whistler's Cove subdivision?
Yeah.
They paid $44,000 into our CDC. So they did pay their portion share.
Portion of park, does that include snow removals, maintenance, plans for that road?
No, capital improvements.
That's why we should not accept any more for snow removal, because those are ongoing expenses into the future. And then other homeowners are having to pay that privilege of having us remove the snow.
But if we're, in the future, if you start taking any property taxes, you could expand that. Because
if we start taking property
if
taxes?
you start using property taxes to plow roads.
Greater conversation, we're out of time,
It
so.
is, absolutely is, but it's like, it's not a hard stop.
Yeah.
Future topic.
Okay, so we're gonna find out the legalities behind exactly what we can do, and then put this back on the agenda for a further conversation, once we've all had a chance to think it through a bit and figure out what we can do.
Still have all that CIP information.
Well, it needs to be updated, yeah.
It does need to be updated.
We probably need to figure out what other communities are doing, what makes sense for people that have the same amount of snow plowing and that kind of thing, you know? I don't know, Jeff, is that something that Mickey maybe, or Sarah could look into? What are other people doing? They have time? No? Who knows?
Talk to the local ones around us, they're all in the same boat.
Trying to figure out what's going on?
Working on anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will take that on and talk to some other
RDA's is
commissioners.
different than road maintenance.
Yep.
I mean, I could put a question out to planners if they do road development agreements, impact fees, or require nothing.
Okay, that'd be great.
Real quick, maybe Doug can answer this one on the screen up there. So I'm trying to wrap, I'm still kind of new at this, but we've got, let's just take one CIP, wagon wheel CIP. We have this much money in it. We have to, we just pick one road? Say we have $300,000 in there, do we just pick one road to rebuild? So everybody else on this other side doesn't get any road upgrades, or how does that? I guess that's where I'm trying to wrap my head around this RDA money that comes in from the developer. Is this just the road that goes to that subdivision? Or if we're passing through an old subdivision to get to the new one,
I think that's where the
understanding-
tricky part is forecasting what that increased use is gonna do to the existing road. So we know that it's gonna have an impact on that piece of, right outside their gates essentially, but what's it gonna do from Roseberry Road all the way in?
Yeah, so part of the thought process behind the way we developed the CIPs was one, to look at areas that had sort of a logical access to Highway 55. And a nice thing about the way the county's laid out is, in general, everything can go to Highway 55. And so we looked at, what were the boundaries that made sense with access back to 55, and so that you got a CIP area that if you made improvements anywhere in that area, even if it wasn't the road directly going to the contributing subdivision, you were still helping people from that subdivision, get through that CIP area back to 55. So to answer your question, Jeff, you don't have to spend the money right in front of that subdivision or a route that's direct to that subdivision, but you do need to keep it within the CIP boundary that it was collected. And for a lot of cases where, maybe you don't collect a lot of money, there's not a lot of development in a particular CIP, it could be improving culverts on multiple roads throughout that CIP area. And just that culvert improvement is improving your road. That's part of what's in the CIP. So it's not always fully going in and reconstructing an entire, mile of road, something like that.
okay, perfect, that answered my question. So if we have, like you said, a small amount, we have $12,000, certain CIP, each culvert replacement, and man hours, culverts, and everything else, repaving, you're looking at $4,000 per culvert. We could use that CIP money up pretty darn fast just in 5 or 6 culverts.
Correct. And it could also be purchasing a piece of right-of-way in between developments, so that you have a complete right-of-way width for a standard size road. The thing that, we always caution your predecessors, Jeff, is similar to what Cinda keeps saying, you don't want to use that money, say, for an overlay, because that's a maintenance activity. on that road. But if you go in and reconstruct the road base, including the pavement, that's capital improvement.
Trying to get my head wrapped around this. It's starting to sink in now, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Doug. We need to move on.
Thank
We're
you.
out of time, so
Thank you.
Well,
You have
I'll-
a good holiday.
you too.
Hey, Doug,
Think about this further and then put it back on the agenda for further discussion.
very interesting. And I like talking about it.
Okay, we need to move on to a discussion or decision on setting public hearings for the Valley County Board of Commissioners redistricting. My thought was that maybe we had one during the day, during our regular commissioner meeting, and then have one in the evening in McCall, so that people would have multiple opportunities to engage. Maybe try and use the Union or the Legion Hall, so that because we're gonna have to record it, we're gonna have to do all that stuff. It would be easier if it was there, wouldn't it, Doug?
They have
They
a
already
very
have
small
recording.
capacity though in that facility.
They do.
I think, what, 20, if that? I mean, you,
I think they're up to 30 or something like that with COVID, but, I don't know how many more than that would turn out.
hard to say.
Even with the road levy, I mean, we didn't pack that place, even with road levy going on. So I think just an opportunity to come and discuss it would be what we're giving them for open transparency. They can also get on a Zoom call, in the middle of the day, but a lot of people do work, so
Mhm.
maybe if we put it out there.
I agree with you, doing something in the evening would probably be the best choice.
Are you going to consider accepting written comments as well, or just have these roadshow in-person hearings?
I think written comments is fine, and I think, we put out a Zoom invite for both meetings.
One of my previous assignments was to research the boundaries being based on population versus registered voters. There has been some court cases on this very topic. It didn't give a clear, bright line test. It has to be one way or the other. The challenge was the redistricting was based on population, not on voter registrations, and this went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court said population-based redistricting lines is valid. So you're clearly safe if you're going to base it. It didn't say it's inappropriate or illegal to base it on registered voters. It just said you are perfectly fine and legal with population-based redistricting lines. So that gives at least a little bit more guidance on that question, which I think has been asked once before, probably will come up again in these hearings. If the decision of the board is to stick with the population-based redistricting lines, you're certainly on solid legal grounds.
I think it would be interesting to have it, at least get some information if there's any way to get it on the voter registrations than that. Because I honestly thought that,
Rick,
Rick had, a valid thing, because a lot of people are moving into the McCall district where there is, 2 registered voters. They don't have a lot of people in their households. And that's a big retirement community. So literally, you could have a lot more registered voters voting up there than throughout the county where you've got larger families.
Mm-hmm.
So the population base, could be skewed based on that.
there was a margin of error built into that though, and then I believe, if I recall correctly, somewhere in the statute it said, to the best of our abilities to get to that point.
Agreed with that.
I mean, we're making significant efforts to try to balance this out.
Yeah, you're on a good path. What the modifications that you just make sure you make a good record, that there's a basis for those modifications and changes that aren't based on illegal gerrymandering, but there's a public interest that's driving it. So as you go along, make a good record, and then we'll have our hearing and make a final decision with a good record behind us.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should be fine.
I've had a bit of feedback, and everybody that I've talked to said, it sounds like you're on the right track. They like what they're seeing, not splitting McCall, keeping it city by city, relatively speaking.
All right. Do we need dates?
That's what I would prefer. If I can see and potential locations, just so I can get it scheduled to see if their facilities are available. And of course, it's easy to schedule the public hearings for this building, for the commissioner room, but if you wanted to have a meeting up north, we'll just need to identify a location and dates that are available.
So I would think a Tuesday or a Thursday night. Wednesday nights involves churches a lot of times, and it's harder to get people out. December 16th, we have a planning and zoning meeting. I have December 14th. That would work. Or December 7th, either of those Tuesdays.
Did you want to do December or January? I believe that the code says that we have to have, Mr. Oki, is it a decision has to be made by January, or?
My only concern is it just feels like we're getting so tight to that when they have to state that they're going to run in February.
So your deadline to have your final public hearing is January. There isn't anything that prohibits you from moving that up. You just have to have it completed by January. So if you want to try and get this done in December, hold your public hearing and make your decision in January. So there's plenty of time for people to declare that want to run in these new district boundaries. Then that's perfectly acceptable.
I know that it has created a situation for one person already, so she actually will not be able to run because she's in my district with a new map. So she had already declared her intentions and is now having to withdraw that. So I do think that there are going to be people impacted potentially by this.
Sure.
And I think, that the sooner we can get the word out and have that discussion, I just feel like it's better for the constituency moving forward. And I think it's more transparent and open to try and do it as quickly as possible. So that's my personal opinion.
I'm in agreement on, I'd like to get it done in December and
So
14th. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, 7th or the 14th, either one.
and a preferred location for the first one?
I think we just put it on our regular agenda here for a day and just do it during the day so that people have an option of either, doing it, that we could put the Zoom information out there if somebody wants to Zoom in, but have one that's a public hearing during our regular meeting.
Okay, on
And then-
December 13th for our,
I think that'd be
first one.
great.
Okay.
Maybe just do it on the 14th in McCall and
So the December 13th would be the first one during our commission meetings, and then the 14th would be an evening one.
And you are proposing what location for the 14th? What would you like me to try to schedule?
I would just do it at Legion Hall where McCall meets.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be easier for you just because the audio is already there. If not there, we could probably try the school, but it's just gonna be a lot more difficult to set up and try and record everything and do everything if
I will.
there isn't.
Commissioners, would you mind making a motion just so we can have it official?
I would move that we move forward with setting 2 public hearings for the redistricting for the Board of County Commissioner seats. One during our regular Monday meeting, December 13th, and allow a Zoom invite for that also. The second on December 14th, and try for the Legion Hall in McCall at an evening meeting. I would recommend starting at 7,
I was gonna say 6:30
6.
maybe would be a
Okay.
good time. That gives people a chance to get home after work.
Okay, that being too late. Would you prefer 6 or 6:30?
6 would be great.
Okay, let's do 6 o'clock. And create a Zoom invite for that one also.
I'll second that. Wasn't
All
sure if you
those
were
in
done
favor?
talking yet.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perfect.
Cindy,
All
would you
right.
mind helping me put the notices out?
Sure.
I'd appreciate it, thank you.
What time is
All
that?
right,
meeting?
moving on.
What time is that meeting on the 16th? Joint meeting?
What did we do,
Did you say
Cindy?
5:30 or 6, one of those?
Can't remember. Well, let's see. I have it on this calendar.
I don't have it in my calendar for a time. I did actually, but I didn't think we were gonna meet at 6 a.m. Just want to double check.
I'll be here.
I get up early.
I'll have to look. and see what we noticed on that one.
I have it in mine at 5, so just
Will it
figure out what
be-
that'll look like. Yeah,
I can go out here and look at the agenda. How's that?
that's all right. We're gonna move on to the Pearson Landing if you want. We'll just wait. We're behind. Pearson Landing, final plat. Have a staff report from Cinda.
Hey, this is an 8-lot, single-family residential subdivision accessed by Mulberry Street off of Pearson. And I have a recommended motion. Do you have the package in front of you?
I cannot remember, Cinda, if you could just answer the question for me, because I remember it came up at some point, was when did this go from being the storage facility to the platted subdivision?
I believe he applied last winter.
That's crazy. Didn't seem like it's been that long.
Huh? May 13th
Okay.
is when it was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, so we received it around March. And it started out
Trying to
as a
find that. There we
10-lot,
go.
single-family subdivision, and he, went to the 8-lot. There's
Mhm.
quite a bit of public right-of-way that's being dedicated, because you had to do 35 feet from center line of the road. The road kind of hugs.
Property line, the west side, kind
Yeah,
of.
so he had to give a little more than is typical. And they just dedicate that public right-of-way as, part of the cost of doing a plat.
And
We
where
did
are
our
we as far
RDAs,
as,
it was
where are we
deducted.
as far as snow removal on that subdivision?
It's a private road.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I'll make the motion that move to approve the final plat for Pearson Landing subdivision, accept the dedicated public right-of-way along Pearson Lane, accept the CCRs, validate Mulberry Street as a private road, and approve the private road declaration, and authorize the chairman to sign the final plat.
A second. All those in favor?
There's a continuation there.
Oh, this approval is made with the understanding that Mulberry Street is a private road, which I didn't read earlier, obviously, and Valley County has no responsibility thereto.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Need me to sign? I get to sign a plat. How exciting.
I think it's like, this will be Terry's first plat.
Did that alleviate some of the concerns of some of the neighbors that were against the storage area?
Well, they weren't too much, he wasn't too much in favor of this either, but I think it's better. I think it can be a bigger impact. But I think it's a really good transition
Mhm.
into those areas.
We need the housing also, so hopefully it ends up being some local housing.
Yeah.
I know that, I don't know that it will be. But we'll see. There's some pretty aggressive CCNRs and short-term rentals are allowed and that type of thing. So, but it's additional lots.
Eventually, with the price of the lots, short-term rentals don't make sense anymore. You can't build housing at $800,000 and make them into short-term rentals and make a pencil. So,
Well, that's a concern I personally don't have.
me either.
When you
but-
say $800, I could probably afford a square foot.
Being in the real estate industry, I'm starting to see that. It's no longer pencils at these price points, which is a good thing. All right, moving on. So, the discussion on a potential request for proposal for local housing. So, I reached out to have a discussion with the person that I know did the Springs apartment. So Catherine Allenberg came up. She did a presentation to the city of Cascade last week, and there was a couple of lots that the city owns, but also we own all of the property now between Idaho Street and Pine Street where the school is. And so I'd ask about, potentially putting out an RFP and what would be the interest in that. And her conversation was this next year in 2022, the tax credit program will be available in Valley County. They do them every other year. And so next year is the tax credit program. To be able to put together something that would be able to service our needs for the tax credits, we would need an RFP out by the end of January. I talked to Doug and, he kind of feels that that is really pushing as far as timing. However, I did reach out to both the city, the school district, and the hospital, and everyone is very excited about the potential of doing some kind of a program. So we have set up a meeting for December 7th between the four entities to discuss what, if anything, we could do and how we could help each other to try and meet that timing deadline. Is there anything that we could all work on jointly? City's really excited because if this goes out and a developer comes in, then it becomes taxable ground for the city. And currently it's not. And in the discussion with Catherine, it was, they can't really state Valley County gets 3 units, school district gets 1, yada, yada. But whoever participates financially in the funding mechanism can make it so that their employees are first up anytime a unit becomes available. So if there's a list of 20 people waiting and there's a Valley County employee in there, they jump to the head of the line. Or it could be the city or, whoever participates in that. And right now also, we have the funding from ARPA, which pays for sewer, water, and broadband. And so we might be able to use some of those funds toward paying for sewer hookups or, water hookups, which would make it that much more cost effective for people to get into these units. So I feel like we need to try and do everything we can to move this forward.
I agree with you.
We talked about waiting 3 to 5 years, but the need is right now. And I just feel like if there is something we can do, we should do that. That's important. And this is not taxpayer dollars. It would be the donation of taxpayer dollar funded land. But on the flip side of that, it would create local housing that is so desperately needed right now. Employees are needed. We can't fill positions. Hospitals can't fill positions.
And taxable land for the city.
Yeah.
So, I think there's some success there, but, no, I'm all for it. I think if we can even reasonably try to hit the deadline, we should. And I think having the meeting in December is a great first step.
Okay, all right. So I guess as far as an action item, do we need a real action item on that? Just that
Just to
we
move
vote to
forward.
approve to move forward with it? Would that be helpful or?
Madam Chairman, I guess the question that I would have is who's going to be receiving the request for proposals? Is it Valley County who those requests for proposals need to be submitted to, or?
Yes, we would be the lead on the project.
And the RFP would be created by Valley County or in collaboration with the city, the hospital, the school district?
I think it would be a collaborative process.
Okay.
And after the meeting on the 7th, we could discuss, how we look at that. I guess what I would need as part of that conversation is what needs to be in that RFP. What information would need to to go out. So if there's something specific that, I don't know if you guys have ever done this for housing in the past, or is there any kind of an example at all, or maybe the Valley County one that we did with the Springs? Because there should be an old request for the Valley County, the Springs apartment one.
I don't know if they put that out for an RFP. I think that was just the housing authority or the housing company coming to you saying, we want to do this, and the county agreeing with it.
Cindy, what I recall, and I spoke with Madam Chairman about this, is that there were members of the community, myself included, that were a part of the VARHA committee that did receive proposals submitted to VARHA. It was the housing authority, the housing company, and one other entity that I don't recall. And then they did a scoring, and then VARHA made recommendations back to, I believe, the county, but I don't recall all the step-by-step process.
But there, I'll come talk up there.
That's why I was asking if there was going to be an established.
I think an RFP wouldn't be that onerous to put together with, help from legal.
I guess my apologies for interrupting you, Cinda, and Madam Chairman, again, my apologies, but the proposed sites are all county-owned, correct? Or are there any sites that are under another entity's ownership?
So there's one house in that entire block that the school district owns.
Okay.
So part of the conversation would be, in looking at a greater map of that whole area, the school district owns a block of parking up there. And they also own property that's at the end of the school that they wanted to put housing on. So my conversation with them would be, would you guys choose to move the existing home that's there up at the end of the school and allow that to also be developed? And potentially a part of that parking lot, if we could come up with some kind of a joint resolution on using that parking lot for not only school use, but also parking or additional housing on this. So until after the 7th, I don't know the answer to that for certain, but for the most part, it would be county ground.
And that committee could morph into more of a collaborative, I think,
It could.
depending on what the answer to that question was.
Yeah.
But I think, having the county, which is pretty much set up to do all of this work, instead of trying to get a committee formed, would be the quickest way to do it, especially since we're under a deadline.
Yeah. And we could do it so that the 4 entities could be present upon the opening of those bids, so that each could have maybe some input to that. I think Valley County is the one that's gonna have to make the decision on it, because there's not really there's no MOU, there's no collective where anyone else would have the authority to move forward on something like that.
I guess the purpose of today would just be maybe the commissioners would just make a motion to allow the meeting to take place with the school district, the city of Cascade, and the hospital to have further discussions. I apologize, I don't know the official wording that should take place, but.
Maybe to create the basis for an RFP,
Point of representative.
point representative, oh, that'd be a good, yeah.
Too many people in a room, not me.
Seems like a joint powers agreement would be beneficial as well. You've got at least 3 entities, school district, Cascade, and Valley County.
And the hospital, would be 4 entities.
Are they private or public?
We're a taxing district.
Taxing district, so they could be signatory on the powers then.
Okay.
That gives you the decision-making structure within those entities to kind of move forward.
So we're creating an MOU. It would have to go in front of each one of their boards to accept that MOU. All of that would have to be done really quickly in order to try and get something done by the end of January. Okay,
What's the timeline? The end of January?
the end of January.
Well, that would theoretically give you 2 months
Yeah.
to get onto a board meeting.
Yep. So,
Say I did not capture all of those.
so I would
details.
move to appoint a representative, which would be myself, to represent the county on a local housing joint powers agreement that would create an RFP for a proposal on local housing on county-owned properties. And move the conversation forward on a housing project for local housing
Perfect. With the meeting, like an initial meeting coming up in December.
in December.
Okay, I'll second that. Gladly.
You get all that,
I'm
Doug?
gonna repeat it and see, I think I missed a little bit. Acting Chairman Mopin made a motion to appoint a representative for a local housing joint
Powers of agreement.
powers agreement that would create a request for proposal for development of housing on county-owned property with an initial meeting to occur on December 7th, 2021.
And do you need to put me in there? I would like to be appointed since I started the conversation. Do you have any problems with that?
I do not have a problem with that. I appreciate it. I mean, I've been spearheading that for more than a month. A while.
Okay, that's fine. So it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Would you like to attend that meeting, Cinda?
As a fly on, I'll be there just to listen.
Okay,
I'm
It's
sure I
gonna
won't
be in here.
participating.
okay. It's gonna be in here, so if you want to listen in, Brian, you're also invited if you want to listen in.
I'm gonna start, I'll just start on this joint powers agreement as quickly as I can. If you have some idea who from those other groups will be kind of their representative, if you'd let me know, I
Okay.
can plug them in and
I will send you the names. Something positive in the
So say,
local
that's
housing
good.
realm.
Especially with the
You might work on
disappointment
this-
at Lakewood.
Sorry, Dave.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I said that's great news to start moving forward on that, especially since we found out we weren't gonna be able to do much at Lake Fork.
Exactly.
You might work on the city of Cascade to see if their participation to be on that preferred list is waiving some of those hookup fees.
Agreed. Thank you. That's exciting. Okay, at this time, we are going to go into executive session for an employee evaluation. Make sure he's ready.
I was gonna
Do
say,
you want to go
before we
ahead
go
and
into
just go ahead
executive.
and go on? Or-
If you guys want to make a motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we go into executive session per Idaho Code 74206-1B.
All in favor? Oh, wait, roll call vote?
You got
They're all
a second? There you go.
Second.
Let's get procedure here. Bingham and I.
Mop and I.
It's the end of the day.
It is the end of the day. All right,